Our GM came in to talk to a bunch of our Latin players to tell them, if you don't weigh 180 pounds, it's going to be tough for me to promote you as a pitcher or position player. Like the population of players under the weight of 200 pounds in the big leagues is scarce.
Hey, I'm Bart Pear with Ryan Croton and Jordan Oseguera, and this is More Than Velocity. And today we've got a special guest on here, Carlos Gomez. Carlos is actually a good friend of both Ryan and Jordan, and through the Angels. He was the director of international scouting for nearly a decade with the Angels, and he actually pitched professionally as well. So he's got a unique perspective there that we want to get into, all about scouting, find out some insights you wouldn't normally know or expect. So Jordan, I'm going to let you kind of take it a little farther and kind of set up Carlos and let's get into it.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of jump on real quick and let everyone know kind of my background with Carlos. And I think we met, it was in spring training 2016, my first year with the Angels. Carlos had been going on nearly half a decade at that point, I believe. And me and him were attending a pitching seminar that someone came in to kind of pitch us a product, I believe it was.
Right.
And it was an interesting product. It was trying to make a 3D analysis out of 2D video on one angle, but also to compare them to a historical player, I believe, if I remember correctly. Right. And, that's when me and you kind of started getting onto talking. And I think the one thing that initially we agreed on was my pro career was worse than yours.
Wow.
So it was like, we were still battling, like which one of us was worse, but it's been a fantastic time to get to know Carlos, and, he's probably more of a student than I am of it, because he's been digging into stuff and hammering things out very similar to what I've been doing. And it's been great to kind of have a back and forth banter with him for, over 5 years now of just going, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of that? And there's a lot that we disagree on, but it's a constructive disagreement. And one of the reasons I'm excited to have him on here is you're probably going to hear us disagree about stuff today, but I think it's the way that baseball needs to disagree moving forward, that you need to respect someone's opinion. You need to learn, you need to challenge your views and realize that, yeah, there's some burrs on your beliefs that you need to buff out and really move forward with. And that's one of the reasons I love talking to Carlos, and it's going to be great to have him on.
Likewise. To me, it's having met, when I met Jordan and met Croce, the back and forth and the trying, I look back at some of the stuff I've written out there or what I used to believe, and you adjust, you change, and things change. And if I'm not willing to back up my belief system, first of all, I need evidence to do it. Mm-hmm. And secondly, like all these back and forths, they should change my mind. And if they don't, at least they make me reinforce my points or what I believe in more. It makes me do more research. Exactly. So all these back and forths, all these conversations we had and we will continue to have, I just think make us better, just to be able to, just continually improve and continually change and continually like, oh, whoops, I was wrong there. Let me try to make it right.
Yeah.
And I think I think the mark of someone who's continually evolving.
Yeah. We have to argue, we have to disagree, and we have to do that in a respectful manner, because that's the only way, like you said, that's the only way you grow. It's the only way you improve. I know, Ryan, you probably got something more philosophical than I have to put in on that. But if you want to add in anything on Carlos, because it's a pretty impressive resume, and I don't think we can fully do it justice in a 30-minute introduction.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about him. I don't want to fill his head because it's already full of hair. It's already full of hair right now. If you guys aren't watching this on YouTube, Carlos was somebody when I was at the Angels that I could bounce ideas off easily, because he understood the value of science and the practice of science as far as evaluating talent, and to really, he thinks like a scientist, because, he says, some level, a player doesn't pass his eye test. But then when he's looking at some of the data points that we have, it can change his mind otherwise. And we've talked a lot about, looking at running gait and, the value of the 60-yard sprint. I remember I was in his office and in the Dominican Republic, and we finished the day, and I think we were in there for a good 2 hours, just talking about sprinting. You don't get that with a scout because, most scouts are going by the timeline of in the breakdown of the 60-yard sprint times. They put athletes in buckets based on this. And the challenging thing for Carlos is that he's dealing with a much younger athlete, an athlete that doesn't have the same physical resources of the athletes that we evaluate, in North America. We're looking at kids that are 14 to 16, opposed to now you got an 18-year-old who's more like a man. And there's a big spread of abilities. But what we're kind of breaking down the 60-yard sprint is like, what does it tell us about athletes? And you look at the acceleration component of that 60-yard sprint, and you're looking at the elastic component of the 60-yard sprint. So for people who have not listened to the podcast, we like to go into science, and the first 20 yards in a sprint is highly acceleration driven. Usually athletes hit their top speed in baseball around 30 yards. And so looking at a split between the 20-yard time and then from 20 to 60, you can see an athlete that's got great elasticity. And we had, and basically every 10 yards, they're able to get through each 10 yards in a second or less. They're very elastic after 20 yards. So we talked about this when we were grinding, and I was like, I had gone to some sprint lectures to look at sprinters, and I was showing him, how you can look at the acceleration position of an athlete and really forecast their abilities on field. Right. And a lot of them, they make a number sign. If you drew a line through the thigh that's parallel to the ground, you drew a line that was from the head all the way to the toe, you drew a line across the shoulders, and you drew a line up for the forearm and the back forearm and the arm swing, you see a number sign. And like I could tell when I was talking to him, I mean, the excitement was there. That was a very great experience for me, being on the performance side and working a little bit in athletic profiling, but to talk to a scout that really kind of got it and just sees some deeper meaning of looking at athletes. And it's very challenging. And this would kind of lead us into a question for you, Carlos, is, you're now kind of involved in looking at North American players. You're kind of, looking at, an international perspective. Really, it's not just, outside of North America. You got these kids too that you're looking at here. And I just would love the listeners to know, what's the difference, when you're scouting someone in the Latin American countries versus, a kid from, Texas. Like, how does that all play?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is, first of all, a little tangent on the 60-yard thing was, to me, eye-opening. I have to answer this first, because to me, I had probably 10 years worth of, why the hell do we do the 60-yard? In what world in baseball do we ever run a 60-yard? I mean, yeah, okay, fine. When you're chasing down a ball that Babe Ruth hit over the center fielder's head in the Polo Grounds, okay, so the guy runs 150 feet to the 483 sign, but hardly ever do you run 180 feet in a straight line in baseball. So I just never got into it. And I was that guy in 2009, 10. I was by myself getting 30 yards on everybody and trying to fit it in a best fit line to try to predict what a 60 time would be. But I just never nobody ever told me, like, why are we doing this 60? And when Ryan gave me this dissertation on elasticity, I was like, oh, thank you. It just made me like, okay, I got a reason why. We were all told, right, when we were pitchers and we were younger, hey, if you're sore, run. If you're sore, run. And I'm like, why? Like, I got nothing to do with throwing. And then one coach finally told, well, when you run, like, your blood starts circulating, you repair better. It's like, bro, you could have told me that like 10 years ago and I would have ran way more. So I need a reason why. And Ryan was able to do that for me with many things, including that 60-yard thing. but getting back to what's the difference between international and domestic, I think you hit part of it is training isn't the same in general. Now we're going to talk in general. The way I think about it, kind of domestic amateur and international, obviously let's assume that they're the same age range. Let's assume they're 15 and 16. In general, the domestic player will have had a little more specialized training in general. And on the international front, and we're talking more like Latin America, which is what I know most, it's a little more, now it's getting better, it's getting more modern and whatnot, but it's sort of like, if you remember Rocky IV, Drago and Rocky training in Russia, right? Like, so Drago's running around with all the bells and whistles, and Rocky was out there in the snow and, picking up family members. And so it's not quite like that dramatic, but the training age is as Protein taught me, is different, and the specialization is a little bit different in Latin American players in general. Now there are some agents that do, and some kids that have a lot of access to specialized training, but that's really where it comes down to. It's just very well, the training, and not to mention their culture and how they eat, and it's just a myriad of differences between those guys.
Real quick, I mean, you mentioned the nutrition on how those guys are eating, and if you don't mind, just kind of giving a little bit more background on that, because that's one of the things we touch on a lot for the guys who have listened, is the issue I've run into, and I've gone back into working in the private sector now after finishing up with the Angels and having a lot of conversations, and that's been one of the huge things, is nutrition for that age range is so poor, especially here in the States. Like, we have more access to food, but we make bad choices. If you don't mind going over that, because I really want to hammer home how grateful people should be with the options of nutrition that we have here to be some of the best athletic specimens that we can be when it comes down to training and specializing in your sport or whatever it is you want to do. And I always loved going over to the DR. I went there in college. We went and played some games there. I went there with the Angels, and just to see how resourceful the people who are serious about it is awesome. And I'm sure you got some better examples than I do.
The nutritional aspect is something that we try to work on with the Angels a lot. And a lot of it is I'm Puerto Rican. I grew up on rice and beans, and so do most Latin American players. Or we grow up with, or in Venezuela, I grew up with arepas, right? And and carby stuff. And though we ignore the role of protein and non-processed stuff and not overloaded with sodium stuff. And in the US in general, to your point, Jordan, we have more of an access to it. And we have, in general, better funds and more availability of something that is not rice and beans. And so we tend to use that as the quote unquote filler and the kind of the main fuel source sometimes. And a lot of our athletes, I think a lot of our Latin American athletes they just don't know. They don't know that they're just not. It's not intelligence. It's just we don't teach them the right thing. We don't teach them that you know what, like this chicken breast and getting some protein in you is more important than we had an obsession with, like, at one point in time, it's like, oh, we got to put weight on them, put weight on them. Well, what weight do you want to put on? Like, you want to put on like rice and beans weight, or do we want to put, muscle mass weight?
I think that's a great point. Rice and beans weight versus muscle mass. And that's, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it just, like, you're saying this, and it just reminds me of a conversation we had in the 8-pack in between field 78 and 79 next to Whataburger, and we're sitting there in spring training. We're talking about one of these players who was there for our early camps and everything. And he just kept losing weight and losing weight and losing weight. And I remember we were talking, we were just like, man, we don't know why this kid he's looking sickly, and we want this guy going to an affiliate. We want him busting out of camp, ready to roll. And all of a sudden we get the translators over, they start talking and he's just going like, yeah, I don't like this food. It's just different. And then once he got that education and he got that understanding of food is not necessarily always for your enjoyment. It's like putting gas in the car.
Right.
Like you got to put the good fuel in your car. It may not be the most enjoyable thing to gut down because it's so much different than your culture, but you need to make sure you're putting that in you. And then once he started doing that, his energy levels rose. His velo got back to where it was. He started having endurance to go more than 15 pitches. He wasn't running out of gas in the weight room with Croton doing their crazy activations and hip movements and all this other stuff going on that I've never seen before. It's pretty impressive. But all of a sudden he started making it through a full workout. And next thing you know, he's breaking camp in an affiliate and he's cutting through a system, all based on understanding that nutrition is not always that comfort food of what mom makes you in the kitchen. Sometimes you're going to go to college, you're going to leave, Venezuela, and you're going to go play in the Dominican, and that's different food over there. And then you go to the Dominican and you get to play in the States, and that's different. And then you go from Arizona to the Midwest, and that's a completely different nutritional palette there. Then you go to the Southern League, and that's a different nutritional palette. And you need to just understand that regardless of where you're at, that nutrition's to fuel your performance. It's not necessarily always an enjoyment thing. It can be, but we need to understand, are we eating for performance or are we eating for pleasure some of those times? And there's nothing wrong with either one of them.
I want to just jump in on this because this is right in my wheelhouse. On the performance side, one of the things that happen when we get the Latin American players over into the US is that our food is not really suiting their taste buds. So we were having a lot of issues. We're showing the trajectory of the North American athlete, their lean mass gain. So generally between the ages of 18 and 22, this is really well known in research that the athlete typically gains 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. That's usually what happens in a North American player. Now, for the Latin American player, it's a lot more of a difficult task. A lot of them are coming in very lean bodies, their bone structure. Jordan said it right. It was perfect. He's like, when you describe a player's body, are they a fungo bat? Are they a baseball or a brick? These dudes are mostly fungo bats. Okay. So they don't have the carrying capacity for mass to begin with. And you couple that with them not liking the food. There was a point in time where I had a strength coach sit in with them and watch these kids eat, because I said, you know what, like, we tell them what they need to do. We've shown them, we've had numerous presentations. Our GM came in to talk to a bunch of our Latin players to tell them, if you don't weigh 180 pounds, it's going to be tough for me to promote you as a pitcher or position player. Like, there's the population of players under the weight of 200 pounds in the big leagues is scarce, and a lot of these guys were not getting the point. So we had to put a strength coach out there to watch them eat. And when you looked at the proportion of food on their plate, some of them would eat a lot, but they wouldn't eat eggs, and unfortunately eggs were like the only protein that we put out on a regular basis. I wouldn't call the food that we had at the complex to be the top-notch food. I mean, I can see there's been some days where I'm like, man, I don't know if I can touch this mystery meat. I don't know what this is. But I will tell you that we need to, and if Major League people are listening, we need to find a way that you influence a little bit more of the cooking culture to be Latin oriented for those kids. And I know it's like, this isn't something that everybody can participate in, but if there's a way, in which they can expedite their development time, it's through training and it's through eating. It is so much a skill for these athletes. It's not funny. And, a lot of these players, we even took them out of competition. They played less games. We needed them in the weight room. We knew that we need to get their weight up. We need to get their weight up. There was one of the players that we had, Jorge Tavares. The guy was like 5'6". Yeah, nasty curveball. Threw in the low 90s, could jump 42 inches. Like, he was just an unreal athlete, full of power, but he had no mass. He had no mass. If he ran into you at full tilt, he's going down. and you're not standing, you could blow him over. We had to figure out a way to gain weight on these guys, and really it's in the food and the habits. And I kind of want to bring in our technology, but I was part of a research study that actually evaluated the Latin American player's shoulder strength versus the North American player's shoulder strength. Now, comparison between them is that the Latin American player actually has greater strength relative to their body weight, but that's only because they're very light and they're small. Now, the American player has a lot of absolute strength. That means their total raw strength measures for their shoulders were very high comparatively, and they could throw harder. So, in terms of the comparison between these two groups, we need to have a good process of understanding how can we boost arm strength. And the athletes, they like Carlos said, they all have their training backgrounds in all different places. Some of them didn't really have an arm specific training routine coming in, which I thought was very interesting. A lot of them, some of them had like orthopedic imbalances. You'd see some winging scapula. They'd be missing posterior strength. These guys, if they did go to a gym, they love doing a lot of bodybuilding type of stuff. As young athletes, and it was very challenging. On the flip side, we did get a guy from Carlos, Alexander Ramirez, who should be playing for the Arizona Cardinals, as a tight end. Like, this guy was built out of diamonds. He was
similar to me, very similar build.
Yeah, very similar to Jordan. But finding those athletes at 16 years old, this kid came in, I thought he was 22. I mean, I don't think he was 22, no. But he was so developed as an athlete, and it just looked like he had a life of training for football, playing football, and great acceleration. He has a heavier body. I think he was like 215, something like that. When we got him, he was a monster. But you don't see those players. When you see those players in the DR, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, you see a player like that in the DR that plays baseball pretty decently, but has physical stature. Those are guys that make money, correct?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't think we're any different than any other sport in the world that, given the choice between 5'10", 170, if they move the same way, 5'10", 170 and 6'3", 220, and they move in similar ways, the 6'3", 220 guy is, in theory, better potential, just because he's got more stuff to him. He's got more oomph to him, right? There's more potential energy. There's longer levers. There's more muscle mass. So those guys are going to get paid.
Yeah.
Given that they have some degree of baseball skill. And sometimes they don't have much baseball skill, but we pay them anyway because we think, oh, well, we'll make them a baseball player.
Yeah, and that's one. I just want to kind of go on in there. This is what I thought was interesting about Carlos, because he would find some of these players that would sign for a bag of chips. Really, you're bringing them in, but he saw the skill level on some of these players, these undersized players, and we brought them in, and it was just so interesting because there were some high responding players. I'm not saying that every Latin player we brought in. They didn't gain weight. Some of these guys, they responded really well. And you can kind of see some of the players that have come in, like the Hector Jans. I think you had Jose Suarez, right? Carlos.
Suarez,
yeah. Some of these guys, they become pretty physical specimens quickly in our development program. And that's kind of, I give kudos to our strength coaches and, how they worked with these players. But I just think that's just amazing when you can find a player that you can forecast their talent, as a scout, and they don't have all the physical resources right away, but you can see them developing. You can see their bodies kind of grow into themselves. And, it's been a pleasure to work with the players he brings in because, they're hungry. A lot of those guys are hungry. They're really hungry. They know, for those of you who are listening and you never seen a DR complex, some of these places, they're sleeping 16 guys to a room. these kids are signing, they're sleeping 16 guys to a room. I know when I was with a former team, I'm not going to mention the name, kids were sleeping on the floor. I mean, it's not, on 2-inch mattresses, just piled up on each other. You never seen something like that. I'm sure it's changed.
Apparently never played indie ball.
Yeah. But yeah, but to kind of talk to them, it's just like, they're hungry. And, a lot of these guys, like the North American kids take it for granted, at some point, they do. I've been with a few that I've seen that, they come from great families. They don't have, their parents have jobs, they're making money, and you got these Latin kids that they're sending money home. They're not making much money, and the motivator. So I did a psychometric test. And for people that don't know psychometrics, it's basically the analytics of psychological and behavioral attitudes. So I did a psychometric analysis of motivation for players. And I wanted to know, how are players motivated by age, where they come from, and in terms of, their love of the game, money, their status in society, a few different things. But when it came to the Latin player, their motivation was taking care of their families. Some of them even had that particular motivator greater than the passion for the game themselves. And that was very unique, because I did not see that in a lot of North American players until they hit AA or AAA. And the reason being is because they had children and they had wives. So now it's shifted. But when you see that in, those young players, you can't imagine, like, I can't imagine being 16 years old. I just first get signed, and I'm getting into a major league team. So July 2nd sign, and I'm just kind of figuring my way out. And playing in these kind of, backfield leagues. Are called the tricky league. When you're a youngster like that and you're in a pro team, you're not really doing the stuff that the everyday Latin player are playing. And, they're playing for their families, man. We're teenagers, we're playing for fun. We're playing with our friends. We're playing, because we love baseball. We're watching it on TV. Another crazy thing about, the Latin players that Carlos would bring in, we had an instructional league. And I was saying, in the instructional league, I talked to a lot of these players, talked to a handful of our Latin players, and they never had seen a major league game. They had never seen a major league game. And they are professional baseball players with a major league organization. And so I said, we need to set up a game where we go in an instructional league to watch the Arizona Diamondbacks play. It's the only local team here in Arizona that we're playing in, September. And, you go there and you watch the kids' faces. There's a few of those kids that didn't even talk. They were just kind of like taking it in. And, right there, it kind of clued me into mind. I'm like, this is a different type of baseball player. This is different all around.
And not to interrupt you, but I think a lot of it is, I've adopted this context is everything approach mantra in my life recently. And a lot of people, myself included, just at first didn't understand the motivations for, in general, like with the Latin American players that we dealt with. And until you've been there, and you see them at the complex. I mean, sometimes when we see them at their homes and where they train before we sign them, it's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking where they come from and the level of poverty sometimes that you run into. I shouldn't even say sometimes, oftentimes. So when you start seeing their motivation and that baseball's a way out, you can see where the hunger comes from. And so unless you've been, I hear colleagues and others say, "Oh, I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he'd do something like that." Well, you don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to be, very impoverished and not be able to afford food and, just not have the family structure that you think that is common, more common in North America. So until you've been there, what was Everlast song, right? What it's like, that one. I reference it often because unless you know what it's like, it's tough to really render judgment.
Yeah, and just to touch on that is, I had always heard people tell me about it, but until the first time I went to the Dominican Republic, and you're just literally driving down a dirt path, and then all of a sudden there's a village in a sense
Right there.
made of sheet metal.
Yep.
Or, cardboard houses or whatever it may be, and you don't fully understand it until you've been there. And it really helps you understand, number one, how awesome that culture actually is, because what they do with the cards that they're dealt, in the sense, is absolutely impressive. And I have, we got to try to get him on the show at some point, but Jim Gott, he was like the mayor of Boca Chica, like he would go there. He'd be in the villages. He'd be in those small little cities doing everything there, just awesome stuff with those young kids. And he would be making sure that when they came over to the States, that they were getting the treatment of going like, hey, look at what you have this opportunity for. Let's get your family set up. Let's find a way to make you successful. And of all the people I've ever worked with, Ryan, you're fantastic with it as well, but Jim Gott was 150% in it for those Latin American players. And that's one of those things, like, with that, I've never personally had an issue with maybe one or two guys that you had signed and sent over, but you do a fantastic job of not only finding an athlete, but finding someone who's character driven as well. Like, I never really had an issue with the guys. Some people did, but I always loved almost every single player you brought over. And I remember, I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, but you had a rule called, I won't use the name, but there was a right-hander who me and you both loved. Big stride, huge hip and shoulder separation, great torso direction. He was like 82, 84 when we signed him. Me and you were both like, this kid's going to throw hard. Everyone told us we were crazy. He ended up throwing really, really hard. You know who I'm talking about. You have a rule that you put in place with that player's name. Do you mind talking about that a little bit? I think you know what I'm talking about. I think you know.
Well, okay. Let me cut for a second, and we can edit this out later. Who is it?
Cedric Franco.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is exactly. Yeah. So the I guess we can.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not. I just want to.
Yeah.
I just want to give you the opportunity.
I'll we have the
awesome
blank
story
rule.
coming up.
The blank rule, right? And so, well, hell, like we should just mention his name. Cedric Franco. Yeah. So one of the great things about being in baseball for so long now is things that not only others teach you, like baseball people teach you, but the kids themselves teach you.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Cedric Franco, we bring him in, we fly him for his first time ever flying. We bring him in from Panama. We had a tryout with him and several other players from different countries, and most of them were Venezuelan. And so we bring in Franco. Actually, the other ones were Venezuelan. So it was Franco and I want to say 3 or 4 Venezuelan players we brought in. We joined them with the Dominican players and had a tryout at the complex. And so the Franco rule was basically a no excuses rule, because Franco, we flew him in from Panama, his first ever flight, not just flight out of the country, his first ever flight, period. We stick him in with some other players that he did not know. And then the following day, he just dealt. Now he's sitting 84, 85 and had the mechanical markers. But what impressed me most was that kid got out there, have it after a flight, or 2 flights, as a matter of fact, flight in a place where he'd never been to. We put him in there and he just deals like he's a veteran. And so the rule was like, don't give me that excuse that you ran into traffic, come into the complex, and don't give me that. It's like we stuck this kid on a plane, put him in.
And he was 14.
No, I think
he 15?
He had just turned 16.
Okay.
At the time.
Still,
he just turned 16. Still crazy young kid. And so it's like, don't get me started with all these other. It if some of the other guys during that tryout did not perform as well, yes, they could have been not as great that day, and they may have not slept as well. But Cedric Franco like did that, came in and dealt in a situation that wasn't set up for him to succeed. Your excuses are invalid to me. You know,
and that's what I love
amazing.
about it is there's so many even 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, 24-year-olds that came in from college and they're like, oh, well, I didn't get to have my normal post-workout shake. And that's why I didn't have a great game. I didn't get my start off. I wasn't. It's just like, look,
and
play the cards you're dealt, man.
To me, context. The context of everything is. There's a player that we. But by the way, on the character side of things, I think I give that a lot of credit to our guys because we really hammered that home, and they went out and found players that not only fit what we were looking for on a movement pattern point of view, but on the want part of it, they checked that box as it may. Not all of them, but most of them, I'd say. And so what was I saying?
On the character aspect.
On the character aspect. So I think the context part of it is, to your point about playing the cards you're dealt. And so always trying to remember, I've had players that, our guys were like, hey, we want this guy. We want this guy. And we ended up signing him. And I think he's going to get to the big leagues. That just saw me, like I came in to do the kind of final check or whatnot, or just to see, just kind of cross check. And I've seen guys just melt on the mound in front of me, completely hyperventilate in front of me because they know or they think that I'm the final decision maker, and just had a brutal outing. But our guys were insistent enough that he was good enough. So so again, the context of it is important. Just like, hey, this guy just flaked in front of me, but hasn't in front of our other scouts and in other competitions. So therefore, again, just evaluating the context of it all. If a guy just I've told other agents when we go to their field to evaluate other prospects, it's like, hey, if you have a young kid who hasn't been exposed to this type of environment, throw him out there, let him mess up in front of me, and in front of us. We're not going to render judgment, and we know he's 14. We know this is his first time. Let him get his nervousness out here in front of us in a non-threatening situation, so that in his next few tryouts, now he's got experience of like, oh, poop, like I have boss man looking, or whatever, the director looking at me. Now he's experienced it. So let him do it in a non-threatening situation where we're not going to be like, hey guys, it's his first. Let him get the kinks out.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm gonna ask a question, bro. I know you probably have a question in the holster right now, but I have one that's very on par with this, and it goes back to a conversation, one of the first conversations I ever had with Carlos as well, talking about that context. And for me, again, context is the keys to the kingdom when you're come to evaluation. And I remember me and you were sitting in the stands in spring training. We were on, I think we might have been at like a ho-ho camp or something like that. And me and you, I'm learning how to do scouting because my whole background is player development. Like I need to start learning the 20/80 scale, and you're helping me along with that. And we're watching, at the time it was Manaea. I think me and you were watching Manaea pitch is who it could have been. He went like 3 innings, something like that. And, he absolutely dealt. And there was another scout there with us. No, he struggled. He really struggled. And he, it's towards the end of spring training. There's one scout with like the Blue Jays or the Rangers, something like that, sitting next to this guy's a group 3. He's awful. He's never going to be any good. And then you're just kind of like, hey, look, he's having a bad outing, but context is important. You may catch this guy on the best day of his life. You may catch this guy on the worst day of your life. So your initial judgment helps just solidify your gut feel off what this guy's career is. And you didn't word it exactly like that, but it was something along those lines. And if you don't mind kind of going over that a little bit of, adding context to your evaluations.
Yeah. And I think this is part of
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no. I think it's a great comment, great question, because I think part of the way scouting has changed, or in my opinion should change, is we get in general scouting, we get, and not just for Mania, for anybody we really go and scout, we're getting a thin slice of that player's overall career in that outing. So my opinion matters, but let's put it into context of everything else he's accomplished and what he's done. I gave this, and I forget when it was. I think it was 2009, 08 or 09. I go watch Johan Santana pitch in Yankee Stadium, and he gives up 9 or 10 in like 3 1/3, something like that. Now that wasn't peak Johan, that was an 80 Johan, but it was like 65, 70 Johan. He was still like really, really good.
Mm-hmm. And when you say 65, 70, just so people know, you're talking 20/80 scale.
Yeah, 20/80 scale.
Just so anyone who's listening doesn't know. Yeah,
I get to use it. I use that all the time. And okay, I'm talking like he's still a number one starter, maybe just not uber elite, but it's still one of the top 20 starters in the big leagues. And he goes in and he gives up 9 in 3 1/3, give us maybe 1 or 2 home runs in Yankee Stadium. They lose, I don't know, 12, 13, 15 to nothing. And he had his worst outing of the year. And what am I going to do in a scouting report? To say, the way I put it is, what's more likely? That Johan Santana is completely falling off the cliff, or I just got a really bad outing. Mm-hmm. Like he couldn't command his change. Like his command was off. He didn't have his changeup that day for whatever reason. He couldn't get that fastball in. And it's just a report that you go, just didn't have it today. What am I going to put? Below average command on Johan Santana because that day he had below average command? No. He just happened to run into a team and just didn't have a day. Didn't have his day. And so I think it's important to something that I passionately believe in scouting is that a lot of us it's what I saw. Well, like there's so much information out there that what you saw is important, but it's not the whole picture. And so all the information is out there that you're able to, yes, I saw it this day. And that could mean something, but it may not. I'll give you another example. I think actually this happened this past year. I saw a guy in A ball or high A that in a 2-inning outing, he threw 27 pitches. I want to say he threw 22 strikes. Like, wow, this guy threw some strikes. And he's mid to upper 90s, by the way. It's like, oh, this guy threw some strikes. I look him up and he had walked, I want to say 35 guys in 25 innings. What's more likely? Mm-hmm. That he figured it out the day I saw him, or that it was his best day of the year? Mm-hmm. And so now it could mean that he made a mechanical change. It could mean that he had a different mindset change. It could mean that. But what's more likely, the way I phrased it was, what's more likely? Well, I probably caught him on his best day. It's probably not the best way to evaluate him to say, oh, this guy throws strikes. Well, everything else he's done refutes that.
Yeah, and real quick on that. Oh, go ahead, Bart.
I was going to say that just takes a lot of humility to understand that, hey, my perception is not the full picture, and I've got to be able to look, and it goes straight to looking at the evidence and the research and the data and saying, I've got to put this where it really belongs and take what I'm seeing on this particular day in context. Goes back to your context. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just based off that conversation I had with Carlos, he helped me so much, and he may not realize it until today, but in terms of the mentorship he gave me on the evaluation of a player was unreal for how much he taught me. And again, we were in Inland Empire in 2016. Man, we'd just come off one of those miserable series of having to drive to Lancaster, followed up by High Desert. High Desert's not even in that league anymore, so people are grateful, should be very grateful there. But it was early in the season, and I had watched a whole group of guys pitch. And again, I caught them on the best outings they ever had. And again, at that time, we didn't win a whole lot of games that year. We had guys that were young for level on the offense, and they were striking everyone out in their dog that came to the plate. And I just thought these guys, man, they must be really, really good. So I'm putting in these reports. These guys are P6s. Prospect, these guys are group 6s. They're middle of the rotation starters. These guys are unreal, And then I see them 2 months later, And then all of a sudden, oh, now you're performing at your average. You're kind of spraying balls over there. You got to be careful in the stands because you might get ricocheted by a wild pitch, and no one's digging it in the box because nobody knows where it's going. They're still throwing hard. That the breaking ball is loopy and rolly. And then it's, I have that conversation with Carlos when he comes in town around the All-Star break. I'm going, man, my evaluation here, when you look at that line score, you're like, yeah, that's probably pretty accurate. But then you look at my evaluation 90 days later and you go, what did I write? What did I see there? And that's where you gave me that context even more in depth. Hey, you probably caught that guy on his best day. Now you're catching him on what seems to be realistic.
But I guess to your point, and I've heard this from other evaluators, other scouts from other teams, and whether they're asked to just see what they wrote, or write what they saw, or put it all together. Some of them say, well, I'm just asked to write what I saw because we have all these other reports in the system. Now, I'm not really sure if that's true. That might just be a kind of a cop out for not doing research. But I think some of them, some front offices want their guys to write what they saw, and then they'll put it together in the office, with analytics and other reports and whatnot. I don't see it that way, because my report should be and I got taught this by the first guy that hired me, Jerry DePoto. Here's what you see, here's what you know, and put it together. And like now, and you can balance it out with what you saw or what you know. When Johan Santana's case, that day, I used what I saw or what I knew more than what I saw. On a young 15-year-old, 14-year-old that I'm seeing in Latin America, I'm probably going more with what I saw. It just really depends. Mm-hmm. Trying to balance that out.
One of the things, though, I like about the way that you operated too, is that you trusted your guys. I could tell that the scouts that worked for you were very empowered. They felt they had a voice. Like I just, Gio in particular, I remember having conversations with him and you. And, I think that also is a super important thing for scouts, is that they, you need to trust your guys who are watching these players, often. And, in any field of baseball, it's the same thing in high performance. If you have to feel like you're looking over the shoulder of the people that you've employed, you really didn't make a good hire. That doesn't make you a better leader, in my opinion. I think that's one of the things too, when you talk about context, which, writing what you saw, looking at the history, you got these people that are working for you who are giving more, they're getting more eyeballs on this player regularly. But I think, the umbrella of everything is where you have confidence in the selection. So that's something too, I noticed, particularly in the way that you work, Carlos, and just talking to the people who work for you, they've been really happy.
I appreciate that.
You trust them, trust them.
But that comes from years of getting humbled. Mm-hmm. Baseball does that for you, right? Like, look up the stuff I wrote back in the day, man. Some of it is just garbage. You find out, oh, I don't know everything. I came in thinking, oh, I got this. No, I don't. And so you start listening to other people, and their arguments are better than yours. Well, that one wins. That argument wins. Alexander Ramirez, you mentioned him. The last day I saw him live was brutal. A couple of our guys go see him in the week after, and they tell me, "No, man, what you saw was just just doesn't count." All right, and we went with it. Because the people that saw him that day, I trusted. Frankie Thon, who now work for Seattle, and Frank Tejeda, who works for us in the Dominican Republic, said, "Hey, no, man, like you caught him on a really bad day." Like, all right, I trust you guys. And it happens all the time. I think
these are just so important.
Well, and Jordan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no.
We would talk about this arm action, right? Like arm action doesn't matter. Does it matter? Does it not matter? And I think it does. And and I think you do too. It's just you paint it a different way. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you're able to, you said it a certain way that made me like, oh, you know what? Like maybe it doesn't matter as much as I think. Ryan, you guys were talking about, I saw podcast recently, right? About strength versus about the arm action.
Mhm.
And I may disagree with you guys, but it's got me. You have evidence, so I have to rethink it. I have to rethink it and think. Wait a second. Is it mostly strength, or is it the path of the arm, and how it's released and whatever it does on its way there and on its way, finishing or whatnot.
Mhm.
So I respect people that I respect that have evidence or have been through it. Well, they should make you change your mind, or at least revisit it.
And those are discussions that we've had a ton on arm path. Obviously, the back foot and what it's doing. We've had a ton of discussions, disagreements.
Right.
And I have 6 and 1/2 dozen in the other. It's I still feel strongly that a pitcher should keep that back foot connected, but I also agree with you that it's not a deal breaker for me, and it's like, you've helped me rethink that as well. Even things like, with equal and opposite, Ryan's heard me change my tune on that a lot, to where I still think it's important, but I don't think that's where I'm going to place all my money on the bet of fixing a guy's
right.
mechanics. And again, this is probably a whole discussion for another time, but me and you have had, little tiny detail things in the delivery like that may or may not be a difference maker. And where do we want to evaluate that in terms of words? And we've had some fantastic discussions. And just with that, to kind of piggyback on something you said maybe a minute and a half ago, 2 minutes ago, was be aware, players that are listening, is guys are evaluating you all the time. They're paying attention. Carlos, you're watching what when you're looking at arm path, you really value it. You're watching. Is it changing from your 14 to 15-year-old season? Is it changing from 17 to 18? Did it change when he got to high A? You are doing your research, and you're really diving into what those players are doing, not just from a stat line, not from just a culmination of what that output is, but what's the input going into it to address those stats? Is there something tangibly different? And I think you made a great point. And I'm leading up on this big, long talk here to you say, if you don't mind, if you can, go over your personal evaluation of kind of what's your checklist of checking a player out. Because you pointed out, did I catch that guy who threw 22 out of 27 strikes on his best day? Or was it likely that he maybe made a mechanical change? If you don't mind touching base on that a little bit without giving too much away of your process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this might sound like a cop-out, but it might sound like a cop-out, but I really mean it. And it's just, have I seen this movement pattern before? It's sort of in the big leagues, or a high-level thrower or a high-level hitter. Have I seen this movement pattern before? Does it hit I've softened my stance on.
It's not a cop-out. It's not a cop-out. I agree with you 100% on this, because there was a player with an organization that will not be named that just got to the big leagues, and we'll say will not be named, but Ryan's going to obviously know, and everyone who's listening is going to know. I've had numerous discussions sitting in a room saying, this guy's got big league stuff, but I've never seen anyone in the big leagues do what he does. He got to the big leagues this year and had zero success. And he did not have success in the upper minors due to some injuries. It was kind of a necessity to put him there. And I stand by that. It was a movement pattern that I had never seen ever in the big leagues with big league pitch qualities. And it got pummeled around the park.
Right. And so so the way I've sort of softened my stance over the years is it doesn't have to happen this way, but just like aces get cracked, I think it's like 13% of the time against 2 random cards in Texas Hold'em, I'm going to usually go with the movement pattern that works the most in terms of what I've seen before. So I'll place my wager on those guys in general, because that's what I've seen before. So when I see a movement pattern that I've seen before, or that, like, I'll give you an example on that particular pitcher that I saw 22 out of 27 strikes, he had, and I don't think this is all that revealing, he had really wide glove side and really bad, so what the stat line said was more determined. What the stat line said was more probable than what actually happened that day. Because in my opinion, like, a wide glove side tends to be very doesn't match up, doesn't correlate with command.
Yeah.
So so I usually, it goes with infielders. When I see bad, like glove side on infielders, they're usually wild, usually. And so I tend to use that move those types of movement patterns to take to place my wagers on, in as a may, not, you know what I mean, like to be like, okay, that guy, I think that guy's gonna throw strikes because he has this movement pattern that I've seen in the big leagues before, from glove side, you know, some kind of matching planes with the shoulders, you know, all kind of directional issues, whatnot. So I guess it's not a cop out, but it's like, have I seen that before in the big leagues? Does it work? And I start with that, and then, you know, obviously there's some degree of athleticism that you want to see, preferably the more the better. And then the other thing is an unquantifiable thing is, does he have a kind of it, and does he move it? Does he address pitches a certain way? Does he have a nose for the ball? Does he have a nose for, you know, a hitter making contact on a pitch that he probably shouldn't have made contact with? Does a pitcher
Great
seem to
example,
throw the right
David
pitch?
Fletcher.
Right?
You
Just
know, like,
seems to be.
and I know we had our podcast that we haven't put it out yet on pseudoscience for science, and you were talking about it, and it's like, oh, well, is that quantifiable? And I use David Fletcher as an example because you can quantify it. You see a hitter take a swing and he's made an adjustment. Okay, I'm going to shift 2 steps this way. Hey, I'm going to move it in here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Or you use another example. Who's a great one to think about here was when he was in Burlington, for instance, Jose Soriano. He's obviously with the Pirates now. We could talk about him all we want. But he had those flashes of the it factor to where he would throw a breaking ball and someone would look absolutely devastated. Like, what did I just see? And instead of going, okay, well, I'm going to throw a fastball, he'd spin that breaking ball again, and he'd strike a guy out. And the same with, you know, some of the guys, like, you know, another one who's not with the Angels anymore, Wilkel Hernandez. You see Wilkel, and he would do that same thing as, like, he would, when you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. But he would throw a fastball and he would blow it by a guy, and he'd be like, I love my curveball, but this guy's got no shot. And he would just keep doing what he knew he was going to have that success with, even though the game plan said, hey, throw 40% breaking balls or 35% changeups. He goes, no, I'm going to beat this guy with a fastball right here because I can, you know. And it's the same thing as, like, I know we talk about, like, we want quantifiable things, but I think it's important. Like, you've quantified, you know, the it factor because you see those guys making the adjustments. You're not just pulling stuff out of a hat and being like, oh yeah, I think he's got it, you know what you're looking for. And it's a difficult thing to explain.
And it's a difficult thing to explain, but it's also, again, talking about context. And this happened this year, and I go into one of our affiliates, and we have one of our hitters is really, really struggling. And it's a guy that I know. I'm not going to give away. He's a guy that I know, and he asked me for input. Now, it's just my look at what I thought I was seeing. And hey, his swing was fine. I just thought he was just getting under the ball. Like, his shoulder plane was fine. He was swinging at pitches here with a bat that was here, and it was just his shoulders were a little lower. I mean, the swing plane was following his normal path. It was fine. It's just whether he was just dipping his head, or I don't know what the reason was. So we talk a little bit. I tell him, hey, this is something that I'm seeing, and I know you know it too, and you know where it hurts you. You know where that, and he was swinging a lot of fastballs up, and his swing plane was not conducive to hitting the ball high fastballs or high pitches. So I talk to him a little bit, and I go, hey, and this whole never, I don't really like ground balls. How's that? But I tell him, hey, you might want to think about hitting a ground ball. Like, you know, you might want to think about getting on top of the ball, right? And so he goes, that you know, that's a good point. This and this, and then he tells me the following. It's like, yeah, the pitcher we're facing today likes to work in, and guys are working me hard in up. So he's going to throw me that cutter in. this is a prospect for another team that's pitching to him. He knows him well. He's done his research. And so that day, he usually steps like right on line with the pitcher. That day, he told me, you know what? I'm just going to give up the outer third, and I'm going to cheat in and cheat in. And he was not only cheating in, he was like stepping in the bucket fairly significantly. So if I hadn't heard that conversation, if I hadn't had the conversation with him, or another scout didn't know what he was trying to do that day, he was just giving up that, oh, he steps in the bucket. No, he doesn't. He's stepping in the bucket that day because he thinks he knows where the ball's going. And he did it all day, and he got a couple good swings in because he himself said, I'm going to make this adjustment. Now,
long-term or short-term strategies and tactics.
I've seen guys in the big leagues do things just to, and as of you guys, just to get through the day, right? Like, like I didn't have a certain pitch or whatever it may be, and I got to make this adjustment to do something else. And so I was really, really impressed with what that player taught me that day, but also going, wow, I have insider info. Yeah. I have insider info, and the other scouts watching, they may say, oh, he steps in the bucket, but he really doesn't. He's just doing it this day because he thinks he knows where the ball's going. And that, again, context, just straight up context.
And real quick on that, Ryan, if you want to go on this a little bit, and I don't know if you've had this discussion with Carlos before. I know me and you have had these discussions, but high-end big leaguers are elite compensators. They'll find a way to get it done. And one of the coolest things is we had Tom House on the podcast a little while ago, and he's going to tell the stories way better than I am. But in a nutshell, Nolan, when he would be throwing his bullpens, Nolan Ryan, most people don't even know who Nolan Ryan is anymore, sadly. These young kids that I'm talking to, but he'd be throwing his bullpen in between, outings, whatever it may be, and he'd go, Tom, keep your mouth shut until I just feel what's going to work today. And he's just an elite compensator. And that's what those guys do. He's like, I got to find the position that I can throw the ball the way I want to throw it. It's the same thing with that hitter. I got to get into the position that I know I can do when I'm going to hit. So again, I got long-winded. Obviously the conversations I've had with Carlos have been awesome, but Ryan, can you talk about being an elite compensator a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of something, this is, before we get off the podcast, I wanted to hit on this. I've been kind of sitting with it. But, when you look at a pitcher and you're looking at their delivery, people want to, look for something that's repeatable, and is the delivery clean and repeatable? And, I think the compensations, the movement changes, these things are a natural process of fatigue. This is kind of where I get into our app as being a great scouting tool, is because a lot of these guys that have some variability, they can also be pretty deceptive, and I think in baseball, I think we're kind of getting away from the deceptive pitcher in some ways because of what the arm action looks like, and does the ball get buried behind him, or, the ball's coming out of his back hip. And, a lot of these athletes, sure, that have these, non-repeatable kind of funky deliveries, they kind of different every time. They might change their arm angle. They might do some different things. Some teams might want to stay away from them. But where I see the future is that when you evaluate these players, especially if teams are having internal camps, and they can look at the shoulder strength of the athlete and not be scared when they see an athlete that says, what, in terms of, if they're developing their own database or they're using ours, they see that this athlete is ranking quite high for their strength levels, total arm strength, and, in basically all the exams that we take and the monitoring process. For me, I think scouting needs to start to go towards the deceptiveness of pitchers. I think we're really worried about injuries, and it's like nobody has the crystal ball. There's so many different factors that go into injuries. And I mean, with the Angel, I can't even tell you how many times, we were told scouts would say he's got really clean delivery, during the draft room, he's highly athletic, all these things, and the kid would break down, in the first month, first 6 weeks of the season. And just for whatever reason, sometimes it would be a college player that hadn't thrown for a while since the draft, and he's in the mix, and there's some workload issues, but it really comes down to strength, where I think, when we look at these compensations and we look at the deceptiveness in these pitchers, if we can come at it from a lens of, okay, if I bring this guy in, I'm going to have a heavy monitoring process. So, there's a pitcher that we brought in. I won't give his name, but the kid threw routinely for 1 year at 100 miles an hour. He'd touch it every like 4 or 5 games. Big boy. I watched his video. The ball was like hooked behind him for a long period of time, and then it looked like it was coming from behind the left-handed batter's head. I mean, when you watch him, but you put him on slow motion, and it was like it took forever for his arm, while he was in contact with the ground, to start flipping up. So, when you watch a pitcher that's really disconnected, his trunk is already, you see the guy's trunk already at home plate. So everything's facing forward, and the arm is still working back. It's still trying to cock back. And that little delay, a lot of people look at them and is like, man, there's an energy sink problem. Like he's rotating, he's stopping his rotation. And then all of a sudden the arm's still trying to go back, because he's already,
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
Don't forget, I have a counterpoint to what you're saying here.
Well, he threw noise, but I feel like, going back to things, when I saw him, I said, this pitcher is going to have an injury. He is, the way I'm seeing it, and he ended up getting Tom John surgery. It happened, not right away. It took a couple of years, but if we had a better process in place to say where his strength levels were, I would know that when he comes in, we knew anyway his arm action was questionable, but if we had a great monitoring process for that athlete, or we evaluated him coming in, I would have had a lot of confidence to say, you know what, this guy's got a funky delivery, but he's in the 99th percentile for total arm strength based on this particular application. I'm pretty confident that he's going to last a while. And if we don't, the whole thing was, let's try to move him up in the system as fast as possible to see what happens, because he threw so hard, and just automatically put him in a closing role, a relieving or a closing role. Mm-hmm. And, I just see that that's going to be the future of how we need to look at athletes, because there's a premium in my mind to be deceptive. There were guys when I played, I wasn't a great player. I was a good hitter. I thought I was a good hitter. But I remember playing Israel one year. I faced a guy throwing 100 miles an hour who had the cleanest delivery, and I swear I could see it. I could see the ball the whole time. It was crazy to me. And he would always get me out on sliders. He didn't throw his heater. He would kill me with sliders, because I was always expecting the heater. But, then there'd be some other like junky left-hander that I couldn't catch the ball, and it'd be so late. And I'd be like, everything kind of came from a different position, so I couldn't tell. And I always just said to myself, some of the deception, how long the ball's hidden, is I think so unique to pitchers, especially when they can locate and they give this variability for a batter, and they're good with mixing speeds. But I just see this, without going into a long tangent, I see the armcare.com platform being a great scouting tool.
And I'll interrupt you for a second and say that, that guys that throw the ball, Jordan, I'm going to borrow your terms here, throw the balls really late and throw the balls really like to throw the ball in the air. I borrowed that one from you, by the way. Thanks. And so that their timing patterns are not standard. Mm-hmm. So one of them, I'd rather have the guy throw the ball really, really late than throwing in the air for many reasons. But both of them are deceptive, because in general, there's like a certain time. And I think we're going there in the future. We're able to quantify. Not to give away the house, but we'll be able to quantify how early or late a guy throws a ball. Mm-hmm. We should be, in my opinion, we should be doing it now. And so in terms of timing for the hitter, so I think we'll be able to quantify it in the future.
Yeah.
Right now, or as we stand, I think we go a lot with what Ryan's saying is like, man, I just can't see the ball until he's on top of me, or I see the ball like a beach ball the entire time. because he's not deceptive. So I think we'll be able to eventually quantify that. But for the time being, I think how the hitters react.
I now have another counterpoint. So I'm going to address Carlos's first, and then I'm going to address just Croton's, because we need to have some controversy. With what Carlos is saying, like 9 times out of 10, I want the hitter to throw not in the air, which means they're getting that foot down and then they're rotating the torso.
Right.
But we did have a guy that we acquired from Houston, and we all know who I'm talking about. We got him in, I think it was 2017 or 2018. And he threw the ball in the air. But the caveat that I put in there was, if we fix this guy, he loses his fastball. It gets flat. For him to be on, he needs to be able to go fastball, changeup. And it's very similar to like a Matt Shoemaker. Matt Shoemaker's throwing that ball in the air. But when you have a split finger like that, or even like a Nick Tropiano, back when Tropiano's really cruising and he can get that split finger there, you can throw the ball in the air and be almost unhittable. Because for the guys who've seen Nick Tropiano go well or Matt Shoemaker go well, it's pretty to watch. It's really fun. And this player that I'm referencing, he's got to the big leagues and he's had plenty of success with a funky delivery. And if we would have fixed him and cleaned this left-hander up, he wouldn't get out of Double-A at the end of the day. That's just the way that it works. And we had a guy that we drafted, and that was one of my big caveats with that as well. Is like, do not fix this guy. He is big league ready. If we change him, we lose his fastball. We cleaned him up. We made him pretty, and his fastball lost 2 inches of induced vertical break. It's like, well, don't do that. Maybe let's just let this guy be who we just paid him roughly $4 million for, $3.5 million for. And that's my caveat. So 9 times out of 10, yeah, I want that guy not throwing in the air, but there is the instances for a mix of deception and performance, as well as health, because now you change those guys and they usually end up with low back issues. A lot of times they end up with low back issues because they're used to throwing such a certain way for 19 years, and then we change them. That's my disclaimer, I guess, with what we were just talking about there. And then to Ryan with this arm path. You know, the guy with the risky arm path throwing 100 miles an hour. I just want to point out, he never had an arm issue until they cleaned up his arm path.
Clean him up, right?
Yeah.
And, Carlos was talking about the timing of that rotation, and it was perfect. Carlos put it on a tee perfectly for me to help me prove my points. Wasn't intended, but, I'm every once in a while I got to boost my ego because I'm usually just taking lumps. I'm usually here in the trenches taking grenades. But he had a good kinematic sequence. His pelvis and torso, they were rotating fine. Wasn't great. It wasn't bad. He was good. And then we changed that arm path to get him in a beneficial spot. And now we're taking 100 miles an hour and running it across the new, what's the word, Croton, cross section? Am I using that right?
You're changing. Well, basically, when you
what am I trying to say?
You're changing the tension. The
tension,
the
time
tension
on tension.
pattern. Yeah.
And we're switching that across this guy's now his new arm path, and then we're confused as to why he got hurt. We and I think it was kill him with the cure. We
run into this all the time where this is why it's in general we want to see this, but allow yourself some room.
Yes.
Because unique works and sometimes, so just like if you, in this organization, we put our pants on the left leg first and my right leg down first.
Yeah.
No, we're going to do a left leg. That guy is going to not struggle, but it's going to be a little weird. Like his body might twist a little differently if he puts his left leg on first. So to your point about sometimes the fix is worse, and you set it up on one of these the other day about like sometimes I don't know how this fits in, but like sometimes not giving information or not sometimes not giving information is better than giving bad information, and so or the wrong teach, and so sometimes you just let the guy go. He's like, hey, you know what? This is not what it looks like usually, but we got to let him ride. Because that's who he is. And a little tangent on that is something I've learned too, is that we have to learn how the player views himself. give you an example, quick one. We had a big dude back in the day, signed him, I think we signed him in 15 or 16. And he had been taught to put the ball in play, put the ball in play, put the ball in play. This guy's huge, hit the poop out of the ball. And we were telling him, hey man, like, I don't want you to hit a ground ball ever in my presence. I don't want you to ever hit a ground ball. Your BP is to hit the ball out to center field every single swing. No hit and runs, no move them over, none of that shit. Sorry. Just hit the ball over the fence every swing you take, right? And then you take every now and then it'd be like and I don't want you to sit your zone and you're going to take a healthy hack at it, right? Well, he would take a 1-0 swing and just kind of serve it to left field. And I'd be like, dude, that's not what we got you for. We want you to hit the ball over the fence. It taught me to ask the following question to hitters. What would you rather hit 300 with 10 home runs or 250 with 30 home runs? And that kid would rather hit 300 with 10 home runs, even though he wasn't built like that.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like striking out. So he wanted to put the ball in play. And so us trying to change him into something that he didn't want to be just didn't fit with his whole. I was trying to be Nolan Ryan when I was younger. Big old leg kick, boom, right? Nolan Ryan walked a ton of people, struck out a ton of people, threw the ball up in the zone with a hammer breaking ball. That's what I'm going to be. When I walk guys, didn't care. All right. Nolan Ryan was walking people. So, and I was a Tiger fan. So, fielder tells in the air, they're striking out, funky swings, swinging up the chute, putting the ball in the air. I didn't mind striking out. I didn't mind walking people. So that's who I was at the time. I changed a little bit, but at my core, I was a power in the zone and I was Nolan Ryan. And so it really never got away from me, even as I turned to something else later on out of just sheer trying to survive. But I think learning who those kids are at their core was really important. Just because they taught me, it's like, I can't make him what I want him to be. It's an individual player. Yeah, it's an individual player. He's a person that has certain things that he's been taught that I don't know about. Mm-hmm. And he wants to put the ball in play. I can't teach him, oh, don't worry about striking out. No, in his mind, striking out is the worst thing that could possibly happen to him. And just because I don't feel that way doesn't mean he has to feel that way.
Yeah. No, that's an awesome point.
Well, hey man, this has been awesome. We might have to do this again. I know you've got some things in the works, Carlos, so we'll see where that goes. But just want to say I enjoyed it. If you have not subscribed to our podcast, please do that now. We also want your questions. Hit us up on Twitter or go to our website and go through support or whatever. Just say, hey, I got a question for the podcast, because we want to address them. And we'll do a topic around them, or we'll do an individual podcast depending on it. Or we may just do one where we just field a whole bunch of questions, but definitely subscribe so you don't miss out on that. And Carlos, again, thank you for joining us. And everybody, until next time, take care.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys.